The comic book industry is currently in a state of crisis. There is no two ways about it. There are many reasons for this, and I'll go through some of them. But I am of the opinion that a major one is the sheer unprofessionalism of certainly not all, but nonetheless too many comic book creators. By unprofessionalism, I mean conducting oneself in a discourteous manner which does not represent the public values of the corporation one represents. So you'd think this wouldn't be an issue where there is a corporation involved, like the Disney-owned Marvel Comics. Yet, among the writers associated with Marvel is where you'll find those acting in the least professional manner of all. Worse yet, this unprofessionalism no longer seems to be restricted to the comic book branch, but have seeped into the Marvel Studios wing as well. In this editorial, I'll begin by exploring what it means to be professional, before taking on the ongoing collapse of the comic book industry, and why, in my opinion, sheer unprofessional conduct is one of the factors that led to it, before sharing my worry that Marvel Studios could be headed down the same road if they allow this degree of unprofessional conduct from their staff to continue. I've said the term professional quite a few times already, and I'll repeat it once or twice more before all is said and done. But what does it actually mean? First, let's distinguish between being a professional versus conducting oneself in a professional manner, or rather, being professional. Being a professional only means you do something by profession, meaning you get paid for it. So any writer or any other creative that makes money from it is a professional. But then there is the matter of being professional, as in conduct. If you were to Google it, you wouldn't find any one clear definition. And the reason for that is that professionalism isn't so much a skill as it is a collection of attributes, all of which can be learned and honed with experience. If you were to Google what those attributes are, you'd find some top 10 lists, some top 15 lists, some do's and don'ts, but they all boil down to the same basic attributes. There is obviously competency. Whatever your chosen profession, you have to be good at it and know the ins and outs of it, as well as reliability and accountability, which essentially mean that you show up exactly at the appointed time and that you follow through on the assignments that you take on and deliver high-quality work at the agreed-upon time. The rest of being professional is all about conduct. It is about honesty and integrity, respect for others, and above all, self-control. Under no circumstance can you lose it. No, the customer isn't always right, and the customer's demands can't always be met. And that is when professional conduct is all the more important. Why is it important? Well, because as an employee, whether of a drive-through restaurant, a sales team, an accounting firm, or an entertainment company of some variety, you are in fact representing your profession, your professional body, and your organization. In your interactions with not just your colleagues, but your customers and everyone else in the marketplace, you represent the integrity and the values of your employer. If you can't do that, you need to be replaced by someone who can, meaning you won't last long, and your resume is going to take a beating. So, no matter where you are or what you do, it is in the best interest of the individual to be professional. And likewise, it is in the best interest of each and every company to have professional employees, as they will lose their customers if they don't. Incredibly though, some very high-profile entertainment companies have, for the last few years, tolerated some very unprofessional behavior from their staff. Behavior which would have led to immediate termination in any other industry. I am of course talking, not exclusively, but first and foremost, about Marvel. Many of the writers associated with Marvel have continuously been allowed to conduct themselves in an extremely unprofessional manner, and in so doing, they have cast shade on themselves, their profession, their professional body, and their organization. The unprofessional conduct to which I refer is of course when writers and other actors within the larger comic book industry lose control and mouth off on Twitter, or really any other forum, viciously attacking the customer. Sometimes their fellow professionals, or the public at large who do not necessarily see eye to eye with them on, well, any topic really. But usually it's about personal ideopolitical convictions. And the political activism those who are prone to unprofessional conduct are also prone to infusing into their work.
If you don't like my politics, don't buy my book.
Do note that this kind of unprofessionalism isn't restricted to Marvel. It's rampant within the industry. But it doesn't matter as much if someone who, say, self-publishes mouths off, because then they only make themselves look bad. When a writer associated with Marvel, perhaps the biggest entertainment brand on the planet, acts unprofessional, it casts shade on the entire comic book industry. And to be clear, it's not all Marvel writers. Some writers working for Marvel are indeed consummate professionals, in every sense of the word. But they too get shade cast on them by the professional ones. And now they too have to put their pencils down, even if they did nothing to deserve it. Due to the virus of which we cannot speak, all of Western civilization is in lockdown. That lockdown has revealed just how precarious a state the comic book industry really was in all along. No one has any cash reserves. Not even Diamond, who has monopoly on distribution. If Diamond crumbles, and they very well might, then that's the end of the comic book industry as it was. There will still be a comic book industry, not claiming otherwise, but it won't be as it is now, and many of today's comic book writers, maybe especially of the activist variety whose work there is little or no actual consumer demand for, will have to find something else to do. The virus itself, of course, is an external event that no one within the comic book industry is responsible for. But the industry itself is very much so to blame for turning itself into a house of cards. One that is so fragile that this can cause the whole thing to crumble and fall apart. There are many reasons for that. I think an overall change in how we now get our entertainment is a big one. As the kids growing up the past decade or two, kids who otherwise would have grown up reading comics, now have other things that satiate their need for entertainment and fulfillment instead. Indeed, most comic book readers today are the same ones who were reading comics back in the 90s and 80s, and sometimes even the 70s. The industry has tried catering to new, younger, and more diverse demographics, which is commendable. Although they've failed miserably in doing so. What they by and large have succeeded in, though, is pushing away ever more and more of their long-standing customers. Part of this is down to ideological activism put down on the page, at the expense of the integrity of the characters that the customers are actually in it for. But that goes hand in hand with the unprofessional conduct there are so many examples of. I think a lot of customers have been put off by the current writers and other creatives currently working on their favorite books, calling them problematic toxic assholes or something to that nature. The traditional saying was, never meet your heroes, you will be let down. Maybe it should be updated to, never observe their statements on Twitter, let alone interact with them, because even if you did before, you won't be able to enjoy their work afterwards. I mean, seriously, consider what some of these creatives have uttered. If someone in sales, or accounting, or really anything else had said that to a client, they would have been fired on the spot. Yet comic book publishers, even Marvel that is owned by the Disney Corporation, has allowed this level of toxicity and unprofessionalism to go unchecked. Which I honestly find quite baffling. Them doing so has, at the very least, contributed to the downfall of the comic book industry. Granted, The publishing wing isn't much for a corporation like Disney, or even Marvel these days. But who is to say it will stop there? Of all the acquisitions Disney made under Bob Iger's tenure, the two most important ones were Pixar and Marvel. Pixar, because acquiring them allowed Disney to become one with what was poised to be their biggest competitor within animation, all while reviving their own fledgling animation department in the process. And Marvel, because the MCU proved to be the biggest film franchise in history, and possibly the biggest merchandise operation to boot, and that's where the real money is at. Unlike Lucasfilm, the $4 billion Disney spent acquiring Marvel has paid for itself several times over. However, if there is one lesson to be learned from Lucasfilm and Star Wars, it is how quickly and how easily a brand considered nigh invulnerable can collapse, if properly mismanaged. Which is exactly what Star Wars has been under the rule of Kathleen Kennedy and her number one guy, Rian Johnson, who incidentally conducts himself in every bit as unprofessional a manner as these Marvel comic book writers. But it's not just Marvel Comics. It is now Marvel Studios as well, since it is no longer Marvel Entertainment who runs Marvel TV. No, ever since Jeff Loeb was ousted, it is now Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios that controls the production of all Marvel TV and Disney Plus series, including Ms. Marvel and She-Hulk. The former is showrun by Bisha K. Ali, who just before she was announced, deleted 5,000 tweets, which some called shredding the evidence at the time. These deleted tweets apparently were for the most part centered around males in general and white males in particular, and of a derogatory nature that if directed at any other group would have been labeled as extremely racist. More recently, of course, there is She-Hulk and writer Dana Schwartz. Many will have heard about her by now. She has made no secret of what she feels about literally all men, and by implication, I guess every heterosexual relationship, that they're trash. That's not me being hyperbolic. That's what she puts out there. If that is not unprofessional conduct, I don't know what is. What you might not have heard though, is that this is not her first time mouthing off in rather unprofessional ways, or second or third for that matter. Back in 2016, she was working as a journalist for The Observer, even before Trump was elected. Back in the early days of his campaign, she had huge issues with him, because in Dana Schwartz's view, Trump was an anti-Semite. As it happened, she had an in with someone close to Trump. You see, The Observer is ultimately owned by one Jared Kushner, who also just so happens to be Trump's son-in-law. But rather than taking her concerns directly to him, which would have been the, professional thing to do, don't take out dirty laundry in public, she called him out in a public opinion piece. Such a public call-out, of course, forced Kushner to respond in equally public a manner. Difference being that Kushner was professional in his reply, explaining to Ms. Schwartz that he too was a Jew and his family had endured hardships because of it. Not only that, he knew Trump personally, on account of being married to his daughter and having children with her, meaning Trump's grandchildren are also Jews. And in Kushner's view, Trump was, and I quote him here, an incredibly loving and tolerant person who has embraced my family and our Judaism since I began dating my wife. He concluded by saying there is both real racism and anti-Semitism out there, but the words are thrown around too easily and Trump is neither. In other words, Kushner was well-mannered and professional in his response, no matter what one may feel about the contents of it. Dana Schwartz clearly didn't feel reassured, because her subsequent reply was engaging in a pissing match with what is ultimately her boss on Twitter. This isn't just unprofessional, this is outright disloyal to one's employer. Now, 4 years later, she is no longer working as a journalist for The Observer. She has done some podcasting, and she's written a few books, like White Man's Guide to White Male Writers of the Western Canon, where her contempt for all of the above is put on display. Now she is somehow working as a staff writer on the She-Hulk TV series for Marvel Studios. Those wondering just how in the hell she is qualified to do that, ask a legit question. But to her, that is but toxic gatekeeping. In reality though, it should be clear to anyone with all mental faculties in somewhat working order that she is clearly the toxic one. What I find incredible here is that Marvel Studios would hire someone with no qualms about publicly biting the hand that feeds in the first place. And I find it even more baffling that Disney would allow it. But since they did, and they've allowed all of these creators to mouth off in such divisive ways, and for so long, I can only conclude that what they're saying must actually represent the unspoken company values. But even if that is the case, even if what they say is in line with corporate policy, then this kind of conduct is unprofessional. And I'm not even commenting on their attitudes. If their conviction is to genuinely hate a significant proportion of the world's population, by all means, that is their privilege. Expressing it in the manner they do is what constitutes unprofessional conduct. In part due to this kind of unprofessional conduct, the entire comic book industry, in its current form, is at risk. Though of course, their attitudes being expressed on the page must share some of the blame too. And if people like Dana Schwartz become the public representatives of the next iteration of the MCU, the Disney Plus iteration, then Marvel too could go the way of Star Wars before you know it. Whenever you're working in a creative field, some people aren't going to like what you do, and of those, some will be pretty blunt about it. That comes with the territory. It always has, and it doesn't excuse you responding the same way. You are supposed to be professionals. Act like it. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.